6 weeks after they laughed at her dog, 6 armed men climbed over the back fence of Camp Shelby's K9 training compound. It was 1940 hours on a Wednesday evening, 7:40 in the evening, in the military notation that everyone at Camp Shelby used without thinking. The compound had gone quiet. Most handlers were at chow. The kennel block was dark, except for the strip light in aisle 3. Staff Sergeant Dana Kessler had no gun. Her sidearm was locked in the barracks 200 meters away. She had no backup. Overnight staff was on the far side of the facility. She had no warning. The compound's camera system had been cut 11 minutes before the men came over the fence. They were not there to kill her. They were there to take her alive. Because Dana Kessler was the only living witness who could identify the man that Colt had tracked and found 18 months ago. A man whose name had since disappeared from every official record that should have contained it. 6 men, 4 with firearms, 1 carrying a sedation kit. What she had was Colt, 71 pounds of Belgian Malinois, 4 years old, 41 confirmed operational deployments, and a bond with the woman beside him that the Army's behavioral specialists had described, in a report very few people were cleared to read, as one of the strongest human-animal working partnerships they had ever measured. The 6 men knew about Dana Kessler. They did not know about Colt. That was the last mistake they ever made as a group. But before we get to that Wednesday night, we need to go back 6 weeks. We need to go back to the Tuesday morning when Sergeant First Class Roman Varek looked at Dana Kessler for the first time and laughed. Because that laugh is where this story starts. The first thing Sergeant First Class Roman Varek did when Staff Sergeant Dana Kessler walked through the gate of Camp Shelby's K9 training compound was laugh. Not a short laugh. Not a polite, under-his-breath sound that could be excused later. A full, open-throated laugh that carried across the training yard and landed on every handler, trainer, and observer present that morning. 14 men turned to look. Dana Kessler was 5'3" and 127 pounds. She had dark hair cut to regulation length, a face that people described as young, even when she was trying to look otherwise, and a uniform that fit the way uniforms fit people who earned them through work rather than paperwork. She walked with the economy of someone who had covered a lot of ground on foot and learned not to waste the energy. Beside her, on a short working lead, was a Belgian Malinois named Colt. Colt was 4 years old, 71 pounds, and moved the way water moves when it has decided where it is going. His ears were forward. His eyes were on Dana, not on the compound, not on the 14 men, not on Varek, on Dana. The way a shadow stays on the person casting it. Varek crossed his arms. "Boys," he said, loud enough to be a performance, "I think we just got our new handler." The laughter from the group was the kind that comes from men who have decided, before any evidence has been gathered, how a story is going to end. Kowalski, third from the left, big enough to block the light behind him, grinned and said it loud enough for the whole yard to hear. "That's not a war dog, Sergeant. That's a pet with paperwork." A few men laughed harder. Dana didn't look at him. Colt did. Not aggressive, not threatening. Just a long, level look, the kind that takes inventory. Kowalski's grin held for about 2 seconds after Colt's eyes found him. Then it did something complicated and settled into a different expression entirely. Nobody commented on that. Dana stopped walking. She stopped at the entrance to the compound, one hand on the lead, and looked at Varek for 3 full seconds. Then she looked at the compound, then at the kennel block. Then she walked through the gate and found her assigned bay and started unpacking her gear. She didn't say a word. Neither did Colt. But Colt had, very quietly, turned his head toward the group of men still watching from the far side of the yard. Not threatening, not aggressive, just noting. the way a camera notes what it points at. Later, one of the handlers, a specialist named Torres, would say that Colt had looked at each of them in turn, like he was memorizing faces. Torres had not entirely been wrong. What happened next took less than 4 seconds and was witnessed by everyone in the yard. Varric walked over, not to Dana. He walked past her, toward Colt, with the easy confidence of a man who had handled large working dogs for 15 years and believed this was a skill that transferred universally. He reached down, palm open, to let the dog smell his hand, the way you do with a new animal. Colt did not move. He did not growl. He did not pull at the lead. He simply sat, very still, and looked at Varric's hand with the complete attention of an animal that has already made a decision and is waiting for the human to catch up. Varric's hand stopped about 8 inches from Colt's nose. Something in the quality of Colt's stillness made it stop there. Not a warning. Nothing so simple as a warning. Just a clarity. The kind of clarity that communicates without sound or movement that what is about to happen has already been considered and found unnecessary. Varric pulled his hand back. He said nothing. He walked back to the command post. Nobody laughed that time. Dana had watched the whole thing without expression. When Varric was gone, she looked down at Colt. Colt looked up at her. She said, "Good." Just the one word. Then she went back to unpacking her gear. Fort Bliss, Texas, was where Dana Kessler had learned the thing that mattered most about working with dogs in a military environment. And it wasn't anything she had been taught in the program. She had arrived at Fort Bliss at 23, fresh from the K9 handler course at Lackland. Fresh from 3 years of conventional infantry duty she had survived and excelled at and found, ultimately, incomplete. Infantry was about mass and momentum. You trained the unit, you moved the unit, you fought the unit. K9 was different. K9 was 2, just 2. Handler and dog, the smallest possible unit, which meant every capacity and every failure was completely visible. You could not hide a weak handler on a K9 team the way you could hide a weak soldier in a platoon. There was nowhere to hide. There was only you and the animal, and what the two of you had built together. She had understood this quickly. Colt had come to her through channels she was not supposed to discuss. His previous handler had rotated out of the program on medical grounds. The team had been separated mid-deployment, which was unusual enough to require a formal review. When the review concluded and Colt was cleared for reassignment, the placement coordinator had sent Dana a single file. She had read it in 14 minutes. Then she had asked for a video of Colt in a standard engagement scenario. She had watched it twice, once at full speed, once at half speed, with the sound off, watching only the dog. The way he moved, the way he committed to a direction, the way he came back to his handler's left side without being called. She had looked at the video, and then she had looked at the coordinator, and she had said, "I'll take him." The coordinator had said, just like that. She had said, yes. 3 years later, Colt had 41 confirmed deployments and a behavioral assessment that referred to his bond with Dana as exceptional, without specifying further. The way military language often doesn't specify when the specifics are the part that matters. The reason for the bond wasn't complicated. She had never lied to him. Not once. In 3 years. Not a false command. Not a misdirected task. Not a moment where she had sent him somewhere dangerous without understanding the danger herself. Every ask she had made of him had been one she believed in completely. Dogs know. The good ones always know. Colt knew. The assignment to Camp Shelby had come down 18 days before she arrived. The official reason was a training rotation. Camp Shelby ran a joint K9 evaluation program that cycled handlers through every 14 weeks. Dana's rotation had simply come up. The unofficial reason was something she had been briefed on in a room with no windows and asked not to document. 18 months ago, during a cross-border tracking operation in a location she could not name in this account, Colt had found someone. Not a target, not a person on any list. Someone whose presence there, in that location, at that time, had raised questions that had not yet been answered. Dana was the only handler present at the moment of the find. She was, as a result, the only living person who had seen the man's face at close range and could confirm identification. This had made her, in ways she had not fully appreciated until much later, valuable to people she would prefer not to be valuable to. She had been told to be aware. She had decided the most practical response to that was to keep doing her job and trust that Colt's senses were better than any security protocol anyone could design for her. She was correct about this. She arrived at Camp Shelby on a Tuesday. Varric laughed. She unpacked her gear. The training rotation at Camp Shelby divided handlers into 3 evaluation tiers. Group C was the entry point. Handlers in familiarization, dogs in assessment, teams that had not yet demonstrated a performance baseline sufficient for active assignment. It was not, technically, a punishment tier. It was, practically, where people ended up when the evaluating sergeant had already decided what he thought of them. Varric put Dana in Group C. She had 3 operational deployments with Colt at the time of placement, 41 combined work hours on live tracking scenarios, and a behavioral pairing score that the Army's own rubric placed in the 91st percentile. Varric had not asked to see the file. She didn't mention it. Torres, who had been assigned as her bunk neighbor in the handler barracks and who had laughed the second loudest on the first morning, found himself watching her during the first week of training with growing unease. Not because she was doing anything wrong, because she was doing everything right, quietly, without drawing attention to the fact that she was doing everything right. She ran every drill. She hit every marker. She completed every scenario in the time window. Not dramatically fast, not slow, exactly in the window. And Colt moved like a different animal than the dogs in the evaluation yard. Not louder, not more aggressive, just more precise. The way a calibrated instrument is different from an approximate one. On the 9th day, Varric ran a discrimination test. Handler and dog team required to identify a specific scent article among 12 decoys in under 4 minutes, under simulated noise distraction. The compound record was 2 minutes, 43 seconds. Dana and Colt completed it in 2 minutes, 14 seconds. Varric wrote down the time. He did not comment. He moved her to Group B the following morning. Torres noticed. He stopped laughing. Group B ran harder scenarios. One of the standard evaluations was a handler off-lead test. The handler stays at a fixed point, gives a single directional command, and the dog executes a search and alert without further guidance. The handler cannot correct, redirect, or support. The dog works alone. The compound's training dog for this exercise was a former personal protection animal named Bear. 210 pounds of Rottweiler Mastiff cross. Bear's job was to be large, loud, and unimpressed with everything. 3 of the Group B dogs had failed the exercise in the previous cycle. Not because they couldn't work alone, because Bear intimidated them off the search line. Dana stood at the marker line. She gave Colt a single command. 3 syllables. Then she went quiet. Colt moved. He found Bear in 90 seconds. Bear stood up. Colt sat down and looked at him with the specific expression of a dog who has been asked to sit with a large thing that is making noise and has decided this is a task he can complete without difficulty. Bear stopped being loud. Torres, standing at the observation rail, said nothing. He looked at his own dog, then back at Dana. Dana was watching Colt the way someone watches a clock, not because they're impatient, but because they already know what time it is going to say. Varek moved her to Group A in week 4. He did it without saying anything to her directly. The assignment appeared on the roster board at 0600. Her name, her dog's call number, Group A, Section 1. She read it. She drank her coffee. She went to the kennel block and took Colt through his morning check. Group A was where the handlers were. Not the loud ones, the quiet ones. The ones whose dogs moved like extensions of them. The ones who had been through something with their animals and come out the other side in a particular kind of working relationship that you either had or you didn't, and nobody could teach you how to get it. They looked at her when she arrived. They looked at Colt. There was a pause. Then the handler nearest the gate, a master sergeant named Elkins who had 17 years in the program, gave Colt a single nod, the way you nod at someone you've heard about and are finding to be what you'd been told. Colt looked at him once, then moved to Dana's left side. Varek watched from the command post. He didn't laugh. On the 5th week, Group A ran a discrimination certification drill. Handler commands dog to identify and engage a specific role player, non-combatant versus threat, in under 1 second from command to commit. The standard for certification was 0.6 seconds. The compound's best recorded time was 0.51 seconds. Dana ran the drill at 0830 on a Thursday. The evaluating officer had the timestamp on the equipment log for 45 seconds before he said anything. Then he said, "Run it again." Dana ran it again. Same result. 0.47 seconds. The evaluating officer looked at his equipment, then at Dana, then at Colt, who was sitting in perfect heel position, breathing normally, waiting. The officer wrote 0.47 in the log, underlined it twice, and closed the binder. That afternoon, the number circulated through the compound the way numbers do in closed training environments, person to person, in the kind of tone that is trying to sound casual, but isn't. Torres heard it at chow. He sat down and didn't eat for a minute, thinking about the Tuesday morning 6 weeks ago when he had laughed. He thought about it for a while. The Wednesday in week 6 started like any other. Dana ran the morning formation. She completed her assigned evaluation slots. She ate at chow with Elkins and 2 other Group A handlers, mostly in silence, which was how Group A ate. At 1845, she walked to the kennel block for evening check. The compound had gone quiet. The overhead strip light in aisle 3 was the only light on. She unlatched Colt's run, and he came out and pressed his shoulder against her leg, the way he had done every evening for 3 years. She ran her hands along his coat, checked his paws, spoke to him in the low, even voice she always used. She did not know that outside, 11 minutes earlier, someone had cut the compound's camera feed at the junction box near the north fence. She did not know that 6 men had parked 3 vehicles on the service road behind the tree line, and that 4 of them were currently moving along the perimeter fence with the particular efficiency of people who had studied the patrol rotation. She did not know about the sedation kit. What she knew was that Colt, mid-check, had stopped. He had gone still the way he went still before a find. Not tense, not alarmed, just completely present. His nostrils moved. His ears shifted forward, then to the right. She put her hand on his back. He looked at her. She looked at him. She said nothing. She did not need to. She moved to the wall of the kennel block and killed the aisle light. The first man came through the kennel block's side door at 1913. He was using a flashlight. He was not expecting the kennel block to be dark. He had 2 seconds of confused searching before Colt hit him from the left side, and the flashlight went somewhere the man could not reach it anymore. Dana moved. She moved away from the sound, toward the far door, because her job in this kind of scenario was not to engage. It was to get out of Colt's working space and to the secondary position. which was the supply room door, which had a manual bolt on the inside, and which she was calculating she could reach in 11 seconds at a controlled pace. She reached it in 8. Behind her, in the dark, she heard what happened to the first man. It was brief. The second and third came through the main door together, which was tactically sensible, but geometrically wrong for the space. Colt had the advantage of knowing the layout. They did not. The third man had a light. He found the light. He found Colt. He fired. The shot caught the floor 6 inches from Colt's left foreleg. Dana, behind the supply room door, heard it. Her hand tightened on the bolt. Colt made no sound. For 1 second, 1 full second, she did not hear him moving. Silence in a working dog is either calm or damage, and in that second she did not know which one it was. She almost moved. She didn't, because moving would put her in the space, and if Colt was still working, moving would cross his line. She waited. The second. Then she heard the third man. Colt was still working. The fourth and fifth came through the rear utility access at the far end of the block. The fourth man moved fast and smart. He cut left, away from the sounds of the third man, which meant he moved toward the supply room. Toward Dana. He was 8 meters away when she heard him. 7. She made a decision. She cracked the supply room door and put her voice through it. Just her voice. Low, precise, 2 syllables. The directional command that meant, here, now, left. Colt heard it. The fourth man heard it too, which meant for 1 second, his flashlight swung toward the supply room door. That was the second Colt needed. The fourth man did not make it to the supply room. The fifth man, hearing what happened to the fourth, reversed toward the rear utility access. He made it outside. He made it approximately 11 meters past the rear utility door before Colt came through it. The sixth man was outside, covering the perimeter. He had a radio. He was calling for confirmation when Torres, who had been crossing the compound from the direction of the chow hall and had heard the first shot, activated the compound alarm and ran toward the kennel block. Torres was 22 years old and had spent 6 weeks laughing at the handler inside. He ran anyway. The sixth man saw Torres coming and made a decision about which direction to prioritize. That decision cost him the time he needed to get back over the fence. The compound alarm brought the overnight duty team. By the time they reached the kennel block, 5 minutes after the first shot, Dana was outside, standing at the rear utility entrance. Colt was beside her, pressing his shoulder against her leg. The compound was quiet. The duty team cleared the block. They called the MPs. They called the compound commander. Varick arrived at 2140. He stood at the entrance to the kennel block and looked at what was inside, and did not say anything for a long time. For the first time since Dana had arrived at Camp Shelby 6 weeks ago, Varick had no assessment ready, no category, no correction to offer. 6 men were down. Dana was checking the dog's left paw. Colt was watching the door. And every theory Varick had brought through the compound gate on that first Tuesday morning, every quick read, every snap judgment, every confident conclusion formed before a single piece of evidence had been gathered, was lying somewhere on the kennel floor with the broken flashlight. He was a good enough sergeant to know this. He just stood there knowing it, which was the only correct response available to him. Dinah stood to one side, giving her initial statement to the duty officer. She gave it in the flat, sequential, factual way that people who have been through things give statements. No color, no interpretation, just first thing, second thing, third thing. When the duty officer finished and walked away to compare notes, she sat down against the kennel block wall. Colt came and sat beside her. She ran her hands over his paws, checking, same as always, his left foreleg. She checked it twice. Nothing. The shot had missed by 6 inches. She put her hand on his back. She held it there until his breathing was even, until her own breathing was even. When she was sure no one was watching, when the duty team had moved to the north end of the block and Varek was still standing at the entrance not saying anything, her hand, the one she had just pulled from Colt's back, shook once, briefly. She looked at it, not because she had been afraid of dying. She had been in situations that were objectively more dangerous than this one, and felt less. It was because of the second, the one where she hadn't heard him moving, the one where she had held the bolt and waited and not known. She placed that hand on the top of Colt's head. He didn't move. She kept it there longer than she usually would, until the shaking stopped, until her breathing and his were matching each other again, the way they always did when they'd been through something together and come out the other side. Then she stood up and went to give her formal statement. Torres found her at 02:30, when most of the compound had finally gone quiet enough to think. She was in the kennel block, in Colt's run, sitting with her back against the wall and Colt's head in her lap. Torres stopped at the entrance to the run. He had practiced what he was going to say. He had spent the walk over from the barracks constructing several versions of an apology, none of which sounded adequate when he went through them again now. He said, "I wanted to say I'm sorry about the first day." Dinah looked at him for a moment. She said, "Okay." Torres waited to see if there was more. There wasn't. He said, "The report's saying they were specifically there for you, that this was connected to an operation, that you knew there was a risk and didn't tell command." She said, "Command knew. The relevant people were informed." He said, "Were you scared?" She thought about the second, the one where she had held the bolt. She said, "I was concerned about the shot near Colt." Torres looked at Colt. Colt looked back at him with the complete absence of interest he reserved for people who were not Dana. Torres said, "He's incredible." Dana said, "Yes." Torres stood there for a moment longer, feeling the inadequacy of everything he had said and could say. Then he nodded once and walked back toward the barracks. Dana sat with Colt until the compound lights began to shift toward 0500 and the first birds started. The incident report took 11 days to complete. It was classified at a level that meant most of the compound would never see it, which was consistent with the fact that most of the compound had not known about the operation 18 months ago, or why Dana Kessler had been assigned to Camp Shelby, or why 6 contractors had decided that a training rotation in Mississippi was an acceptable location to conduct a retrieval. The report was completed. The report went where reports at that classification level go. What remained at Camp Shelby was more ordinary. Varek requested a meeting with Dana on the 12th day after the incident. She sat across from him in the evaluation office. He had the incident report summary in front of him, the unclassified portions, which told a partial story that was still significant. He said, "I should have read your file when you arrived." She said, "Yes." He said, "I made an assessment without information." She said, "Yes." He said, "Is there anything you want to say about how this evaluation cycle was run?" She thought about Group C, the 14 days in the bottom tier with a performance record that should have placed her in Group A from day one. The 14 men who had laughed. She said, "The training program is sound. The evaluation criteria are appropriate. I would not change the structure." Varek looked at her. She looked back. She was not forgiving him. She was simply not using the incident as a personal claim. There is a difference, and she knew the difference, and so, eventually, did he. He said, "You're being recommended for a commendation for the incident. The compound commander is submitting the paperwork." She said, "I'm aware." He said, "The recommendation includes Colt." At this, something happened to her face. Just briefly, just a small shift around her eyes, the way a person looks when something actually lands. She said, "Good. The certification ceremony for Group A was scheduled for the final Friday of the training cycle. Dana and Colt were evaluated last. The certification board included 3 evaluators: the compound commander, and, by request that nobody had anticipated, a senior handler from Fort Bliss, who had driven 3 hours to attend the evaluation of a team he had heard about, secondhand, through the kind of network that exists in small, tight professional communities. They ran the final certification drill. 0.47 seconds. Again. The senior handler from Fort Bliss wrote in his evaluation notes, "This team does not need further evaluation. This team is already operational at the highest tier. The purpose of this certification is to document what already exists." The compound commander read the note before signing it. He looked at Varric. Varric did not say anything. There is a particular dynamic that happens in closed professional communities when a room has made an early, incorrect judgment about someone and then has to revise it. The room does not announce the revision. It simply, gradually, quietly, in the way closed professional communities manage these things, catches up. The 14 men who had laughed on the first morning did not give a speech. They did not gather to formally acknowledge the error of the first Tuesday. What happened was simpler than that, and more permanent. They moved the way people move around someone whose capabilities they now understood. They made space. They paid attention differently. Torres, specifically, had spent the 11 days since the incident doing what soldiers do when they have been wrong about something significant. He had worked harder, said less, and started watching how Dana ran Colt with the attention of someone who intended to learn. He was going to go back to his unit after this rotation. He was going to work with a different dog, one he had already been paired with for 8 months. But he was going to work with that dog differently than he had before. He was not sure he could explain this to anyone. He did not think he needed to. On the last morning of the rotation, Dana loaded her gear into the vehicle at 05:45. Colt sat in the rear compartment, facing forward, ears up. Torres came out of the barracks as she was doing the final check. He said, "Safe travels." She said, "You too." He said, "I watched the .47 certification on the log recording. Twice." She said nothing. He said, Is there a specific thing you do in the way you train him? That makes that possible." She thought about it. She said, "I don't lie to him." Torres stood there. She got in the vehicle. She drove out through the compound gate without looking back, which was how she always left places. Not because she was indifferent to them, but because what mattered was ahead. And what was ahead was the work. And the work didn't wait. Colt watched the gate recede in the rear window for 1 second. Then he turned forward and watched the road. The incident report on the 6 contractors was resolved through channels that Dana was not required to monitor. The man Colt had found 18 months ago, the man they had come to eliminate the only witness to, was formally named in a classified proceeding 14 months after Camp Shelby. Dana was not present at the proceeding. She was on deployment. Colt was with her. They were working.